Welcome to Be a Light with Mushan podcast. Over the years, across platforms, organizations, global, I have met many inspirational individuals and leaders and engineers. Today, I'm going to introduce someone to you you will find so inspiring, and you will learn a very useful skill in life. And that's Andrew Tarvin. And I met Andrew about 3 years ago, I believe, on the platform on Toastmasters. I attended your humorous workshop, and that hooked me. And I reached out to you to get some insights on my contest speech. And you spent time to actually give me feedback. That kindness, that generosity that I get from you, I was a total stranger. That left a non-lasting impression in me. And I always thought of you when I was talking about positivity and kindness. So today, now I have you here. Welcome, Andrew.
Oh, thank you. No, I'm incredibly excited to chat with you. And one of my passions is introducing and or helping people with the skill of humor. So from the connection of sharing that with Toastmasters, and then through workshops, and then of course kind of one-on-one with you, it's a thing that I'm deeply passionate about for a number of reasons. And so I was honored that you were interested and excited about the topic, and also incredibly happy to be chatting with you now.
Wonderful. I believe all the audience, just like me, want to learn more about your journey, how you get to this humor engineer field, because based on your profile, I read on LinkedIn, you were in tech, you were doing product management, right?
Yep, exactly. So yeah, my self-described title now is humor engineer. And so if people are not familiar with that as a term, it's because I made it up. But it's a combination of my background. So my degree and studies were in computer science and engineering. And as you mentioned, I worked at Procter & Gamble as an IT project manager after I graduated. And as a computer science engineer, I was solving problems using things like computers, technologies, programs, etc. And then I started doing improv and stand-up comedy first at university, and then later while I was working at P&G. And I realized that the things that I was learning in improv and stand-up were incredibly helpful in my day job, in terms of better communicating with people and being a better leader and being able to manage stress better and sharing my ideas better and building better connections, and on and on and on, all these additional kind of benefits that I found. So I started exploring that intersection of humor in the workplace, improv in business, happiness and productivity. And I discovered there's a tremendous number of benefits of using humor. There's a lot of research about it, and yet was surprised because I never learned this skill in any of my business classes. It never came up in engineering school. It wasn't even part of our training at P&G, even though we had extensive professional development there. And I was like, why is no one talking about this great skill? And I realized, well, if no one else is talking about it, but I'm benefiting from it, maybe I should be the one to talk about it. So that's when I started my organization, Humor That Works. And 12 years ago, I left P&G. And so for the last 12 years, have been helping organizations solve problems using humor. So that was my idea. It's like, okay, if I was a computer science engineer before, solving problems using computers, if I'm now solving problems using things like humor, then maybe that makes me a humor engineer.
That's wonderful. Isn't it just so wonderful? Actually, when you heard about humor engineer, immediately attracted my attention. I thought humor was born late, like a natural talent. You can't really develop it because, to be honest, I don't think many Asians have this gene. We often joke around and say, oh, We just don't have that gene. Western people tend to be more humorous, and probably they just have that gene. We don't have that gene. So can you tell a little bit how you developed this? There's a formula that we can follow.
Yeah, I mean, there's certainly a framework. There's no formula that will guarantee success every single time, but humor is a skill, which means that it can be learned, right? And I know that's true because I'm someone who had to learn humor. Like, I wish I could tell you that I was a naturally funny person, because those people do exist. There are people who seem to effortlessly be able to make people laugh or smile. My brother is actually very much like that. But the reality is that oftentimes that skill is learned one way or the other. For the people who are quote unquote naturally funny, it's just very likely that they learn that growing up. Like, maybe they learn that because they have an uncle who is really, really funny, or their parents are really funny, or their friend group is really funny, or they were always attracted to watching TV shows or things like that. Like, my brother is more extroverted than me, and so I think he learned it just through more repetitions of conversations. Because when he was out talking with people, I'd want to be home playing with Legos or playing video games, etc., and he was talking to people. Or also, he was the middle child, and so I think sometimes as the oldest child, you get attention because you're the oldest. I'm the youngest child, so you get attention as the youngest because you're the baby, and everything I did was perfect, of course. And so he used humor. He's talked about it before. He used humor just as a way to get people to kind of like, hey, no, I'm here as well, right? So it's something that he learned growing up. I didn't. And so for me, I had to discover that skill later. And I only started discovering it because I was pushed into improv and stand up. Like, I didn't start doing improv and stand up comedy because I was like, you know who's funny? Me, right? You know who should listen to me? Like, other people. Like, no, I did not have that mindset. It was my best friend in university wanted to start an improv group, needed people, and forced me to join. And I did, but I was terrible to start. And then I started reading books about improv and stand up. We started practicing multiple times per week. I started watching videos. I started watching stand-up comedians to try to watch and see what techniques they were using, et cetera. And so it became a process of studying. And I got better over time with practice and repetition. And so just like you can learn how to cook, you might not ever become a world-class chef, but you can get better at cooking. Just like you can learn a new language. Like, you might never be the top native fluent level in a certain language, but you might get to say conversational in that language. All right, any skill like that, learning an instrument, etc., humor is that same way. And so what we say with humor that works is that we do believe we can make anyone funnier. Like, we're not going to guarantee that you're going to become so funny that, Netflix is going to call you up and want you to do an hour-long stand-up comedy special. But we can take you, whatever your baseline skill is right now, we can move it up a little bit, because we can teach you the art and science of humor. We can teach you the science of humor and then help you practice the art part to start to discover your own style and unique blend of humor in the workplace, or humor for relationships, or humor for whatever you want to learn humor for.
Yeah, that's amazing. You just mentioned about similar to language skills, and you can practice, definitely can get better and better. It may never reach to the level of native English speaker, or maybe one day you can.
Yeah, or it will be. Yeah.
By the way, English is my second language, and this podcast is one of the very reasons that actually is my vehicle of practicing my public speaking and sharing bigger messages than me. And so I loved that actually humor can be learned, and you just provided some hope and the possibilities for me to look into, because I gave up a long time ago. I thought if I can master the languages good enough, probably humor is really too far for me. But who doesn't want to appear to be humorous, to be fun? That's something definitely I would love to learn. So
yeah, and I think it's an important kind of distinction that you're referencing or talking a little bit about in some ways, is recognizing that I'm very intentional in saying that I teach people the skill of humor versus, say, the skill of comedy. Because comedy to me is a subset of humor. Comedy is very specifically about how do I make someone laugh? How can I be funny? Whereas I see humor as that's one aspect of having a skill of humor is being funny, but there's other ways to be humorous that, maybe you don't get someone to laugh, but maybe you get them to smile instead. Or maybe they don't see you necessarily as funny, but they see you as fun or playful. And so I think part of it is starting with, this baseline to recognize that, how do we start from building your overall skill of humor? And then you can learn some comedy techniques as well to incorporate that so that you become both humorous and comedic, but recognizing that it's a much lower bar for like what people are thinking is funny is just to instead be like, okay, how can I be a little bit more humorous? How can I be a little bit more playful and use that to springboard into being funnier over time?
Yeah. Does it mean like just learn to loosen up a little bit? That's
part of it. Part of it is loosening up a little bit. Part of it is a mindset. So one of the most helpful kind of concepts that I ever learned came from the world of improvisation, and it's kind of the fundamental mindset of improvisation, something called yes and. And yes and is simply kind of a mindset or a phrase to say, okay, how do I take whatever someone else has said and learn to build off of it? Because I think especially for, I'm very much an engineer by background. I'm very much a type A type person. So, I joke that if you know your personality assessments, I am a type A blue square conscientious INTJ with a sign of Aquarius, right? Which means that I am a stubborn, ambitious introvert who likes long walks on the beach by myself, right? And so I'm very much the analytical person. I'm the problem solver. And so for us that are like that, it's very easy for us to think in what we call kind of a yes, but mindset, where if, say, someone were to share an idea, we immediately start to see all the things that are potentially wrong with that idea. Not because we necessarily think their idea is stupid, although maybe we do, but more so that we're problem solvers, that we're thinking like, okay, but have you thought about all these things that could go wrong, etc., right? And so that can be good for problem solving. It's not so good for being seen as, light or enjoyable or very friendly, because, people they don't necessarily find the friendly person the one that's telling them no or why their idea isn't going to work. And so yes, and instead as another mindset isn't to say that you blindly agree with someone, but it's rather about how do I take what someone said and build off one aspect of it. And so, for example, one of the examples that I give in our communication course is like small talk, like even about the weather, right? So at least in the US, it's a very common kind of question when you're just randomly talking with a stranger a little bit, is it'd be like, how about this weather, right? Like, doesn't matter what the weather is, you can always talk about the weather. Where it's like, oh, is it nice out? Let's talk about how nice out it is. Is it rainy out? Let's talk about how it's rainy out. So people can ask, how about this weather? So one way to be a better conversationalist is you could say like, yes, so today, at least where I am, it's pretty sunny. It's like, yes, it's a nice sunny day. And if you weren't at work today, or if you weren't at this networking event, or if you weren't wherever we are that we're having this conversation, what would you be doing to enjoy the weather? And in that moment, you're changing the conversation from high-level small talk about the weather into getting them talking about something that they're excited about, like a hobby. And so that's just one simple example of like being a little bit lighter, being a little bit friendlier. That mindset of yes and allows you to build up conversations, and people will remember you as like, oh, that person's a good conversationalist. Now, it's not necessarily a specific technique of like, well, how do I make someone laugh? There's other kind of components to it, but that's at least a starting point to building towards that kind of like more humorous persona.
Yeah, totally. That plays a huge role in effective communication, is the yes and attitude. For example, you said the blue box person, I'm the yellow box person, so we're total opposite. But now we are on the same page in some way.
Exactly. Now we have something in common. We can at least talk about that assessment. Yeah.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. I loved this attitude from the improv and also the your humor works, definitely
Mhm.
works.
Yeah.
And so at workplace, definitely communication is really the key to do anything more productive. So how you think the corporate, I know you also do some of the trainings, how they can implement that into their employees, like education.
Yeah, so I think there are a couple of things that come into mind. So one is that when we train leaders and organizations on using humor, because that is a big part of our focus, right? Because I still do stand-up comedy from time to time, just as fun, but the primary work that we do is helping both organizations at a big level, but also individual people. Like, how do we want to train people at any level that they're at, right? So that they can say like, hey, if I, as an individual person, choose that I want to bring a little bit more joy into my life, and oh, by the way, also get better results in my work, we want to give them the kind of the toolkit or the skill set that they needed to do that. And so from an organizational perspective, a couple of things that we encourage leaders to do if you want to create more of a culture of humor is one, to give people permission to use it, right? Because one of the biggest reasons people don't use humor in their work is that they don't think it would be appreciated by other people. They think other people would either be potentially offended, or that they would not be taken seriously, or that they would be seen as like trivializing their job or something like that. And the reality is that that isn't the case. A survey of over 700 CEOs found that 98% of CEOs prefer job candidates with a sense of humor, right? As long as it's used appropriately. And so part of the first step, and a big part of us bringing us in for like a keynote to an organization or even a training, is in some ways just giving the organization permission. It's saying, no, we recognize that humor is a valuable skill. We should actually be cultivating it and should actually be exploring it. So number one is giving people permission to do it. Number two is giving them the space to do it, is creating opportunities for it. So we encourage even a small, simple things such as creating, like if you're an organization that uses Slack, creating a specific Slack channel, or if you use Microsoft Teams, creating a specific Microsoft Teams kind of chat where you just put memes that are related to your work, or that you can share funny things that you find, right? These small things to say like, hey, whenever you find something funny on the internet that you like, put it in this chat. And hey, whenever you're feeling stressed and you need to take like a 2 or 3 minute break in between meetings, go to the chat and look at what some of your other coworkers have found. Like these small moments of creating the space. Or if you're a leader and you have weekly meetings, can you say, okay, let me carve out 5 minutes of our meeting for people to share something that they're excited about outside of work, or to answer an icebreaker question like, what's the story of your name? Like these kind of small moments are just kind of little micro moments to give people a platform for using humor, but also are going back to step number one, which is to give people permission. And then the third step is for leaders, is for them to actually do it themselves, right? The people, like direct reports, tend to mirror the behavior of the people that they see ahead of them. And so if you're a leader who uses humor, then you start to be like, oh, maybe I could do the same thing. That's what happened with me at P&G. When I started using humor into more of my work and my presentations, I started to notice that other people did as well. My team members did, because they're like, wait, if you started with the story and it made me laugh, but it related to our topic, then maybe my next presentation, I could start with the story. So it's very much about kind of showcasing what is possible. And then there's plenty of other techniques from there, but those are the top three that I would say is, giving people permission, giving people the space to it, and then, kind of showcasing it or doing it yourself so that people see it in action.
Yeah, those are very practical steps that work that corporate can utilize to make people loosen up and more engaged and be more productive. So in terms, you talked about that also can work for individuals, obviously. What about family? What about couple? How do they use humor in strengthen their communication and relationship?
Well, I think in general, we tend to feel closer to the people that we laugh and smile with a lot, right? Victor Borg said that the shortest distance between two people is a smile. Like, and you probably recognize that even with a stranger. If you see a stranger and they smile and you smile back, there's a little bit of a connection there. Even if you've never met that person, you're like, oh, okay, at least we're kind of on friendly terms, right? And so humor is a way that we can build and enhance relationships. It can be incredibly helpful for conflict management, right? If you have a strong relationship before conflict happens and you use humor to build that relationship, surviving that conflict becomes a little bit easier. Or if, I know in my own experience, kind of with my wife, if we get into a disagreement in some regard, a little bit later, if she makes me laugh or if I'm able to make her laugh, we kind of resolve that tension that exists, right? When we're using humor with someone, we're kind of in some ways saying that no matter what else is going on, we're still cool with each other. We still like each other in some regard. And so I think in general, humor is a positive trait for families. It's a positive trait for relationships. In general, how you do it, it all kind of depends on the context, right? And so the way that we think about humor in terms of its application is we teach something that we call the humor map, which stands for your medium, your audience, and your purpose. And so if you want to be more intentional in using humor, you can start to create a humor map for different scenarios. And so you might say, okay, what's the medium of how I'm going to, use this humor? Am I sending an email at work that I want to get people to read, or am I having a date night with my significant other, right? The medium changes. Then the second piece is your audience, and your audience is who's going to receive that humor and what is your relationship to them. Because if I'm giving a sales presentation to a brand new client that I've never met before, then the humor that I use is going to be very different than if I'm having a conversation with my mom, who I have a very close relationship with, right? So your audience kind of dictates what type of humor you'll use as well. And then finally, the most important piece is your purpose. What's your goal in using humor? When we're using humor with friends and family, we maybe don't need to have a very specific goal. But if we're using humor in the workplace, we should be very clear on what we hope to get out of using that humor. Are we using it in a presentation so that people pay attention? Are we using it in a presentation so that people understand an idea better? Are we using it in our own life so that we can relieve stress after a long, stressful day? Right? Whatever that goal is, it's all going to kind of dictate the type of humor that we might use. But if you start with that intentionality, starting a little bit more broad to say, okay, what's my medium, audience, purpose? Then you can start to look at to say, okay, what's the right humor across those three things? What's the right type of humor that I should use for that purpose? And so, for example, if you say, okay, I want to use humor to have a better relationship with my significant other, then I would say, okay, there's a couple of different things that you want to do. One, you probably want to stay away from aggressive humor. You don't want to necessarily be super sarcastic with them all the time because they might see that as negative. But instead, you might look for what are activities that we can do together. Like, could we play a game of charades? Or my wife and I love to play a game called Rummy Cube. And so sometimes when we're feeling stressed or she's had a long day, I'll just put Rummy Cube out on the table and be like, let's play a game. Another big one for us is dance parties. My wife, in fact, got a little button that's called 30-second dance party that just sits on our dining room table. And so if we're feeling stressed or if we get into a little bit of a disagreement or if our daughter took a long time to go to sleep or whatever, one of us would just press the button and it plays a 30-second like high beats per minute song and we'll just dance for 30 seconds and immediately it kind of changes the mood in the room, right? So there's all these small things that you can do, but it starts first with understanding what your goal is and the humor that you use.
Wow, that's very useful. I'm going to apply those techniques right away.
Love it. Yeah.
By the way, my husband is blue box individual. And so having conflicts is norm. And but we love each other. That's a foundation. And the purpose is so clear. We just need to communicate better and have a better way to solve it. So this is very good. I also mentioned that when we started our conversation, I think in your work, I see a lot of kindness, positivity. Would you tell a little bit about what that kindness, positivity played a role into it?
Yeah, absolutely. It's a brand of the humor that we use, and it's 100% true that that's not the only type of humor, right? You can use humor to uplift people, or you can use aggressive humor to kind of put people down as well. You can use very positive, inclusive humor to build up relationships, or you can use it just to make a certain group of people laugh. And so part of it is determining the style of humor that you use in your goal. And for us, we just decided that we want it to be positive. Like whenever I do any type of, whether it's a keynote talk or even a stand-up comedy club show at 10 p.m. on a Friday night, my humor is what I always call rated mom. Like I always want my mom to be proud of the humor that I do, right? And I decided that relatively early on in my stand-up career, because when I first started, I would do kind of the little bit more of the risque type jokes, etc. And then I realized like, oh wait, if I want to invite my mom to a comedy show, I don't want her seeing me talk about some of these other things. And so I'm like, oh, let me just clean up things. Let me always make sure that I'm doing something that my mom is proud of. But that doesn't have to be the case for everyone. It's an individual style. So I think what's maybe helpful for people listening is to understand that there are 4 styles of humor as defined by psychologist Rod A. Martin. He says that there is affiliative humor. This is positive, inclusive humor, right? So it's positive humor that there is no target and includes basically everyone together. And this is a great type of humor to use in the workplace. It's not necessarily quote unquote funny, but it's the things like effective team building events. And I'm not talking about like trust falls that everyone hates, but improv exercises that build a skill, or answering a question like, what's the story of your name, etc. Like there is no target. It's just positive, inclusive humor. And then you have self-enhancing humor. Self-enhancing humor is a positive form of humor, but the target is yourself. And so this is a way of kind of reacting to difficulties in life and saying, okay, how can I find the humor in that situation? To me, it's best kind of expressed by, there's a Kurt Vonnegut quote that says, laughter and tears are both responses to frustration. I myself prefer to laugh because there's less cleaning up to do afterwards, right? So it's this idea of like, okay, how do I find in difficult moments, how can I find the humor in the situation? That's self-enhancing. Then you go to the negative forms of humor. You have self-defeating humor, and this is a negative form of humor where the target is yourself. And so this is things like self-deprecating humor, where you kind of poke fun at yourself a little bit. So for example, a friend of mine recently told me that I kind of look like Harry Potter, but if he was just an accountant, like not a magical wizard or anything. So like kind of a short joke like that, where it's like, I'm kind of poking fun of myself, etc. Self-deprecating humor can be a good form of humor to use in certain situations. So like if you're a leader, or if you're in a high status position for whatever reason, because you're the one standing on stage with a microphone, or because you're the leader, or because you're the most senior person in the room, or whatever it happens to be, self-deprecating humor can be a great way to kind of reduce your status. It can be a way to tell the audience like, hey, I don't take myself too seriously, that I still have some humility, and that it makes me more accessible kind of to other people to poke fun of myself a little bit. The other thing that it does is it gives me a little bit more permission to kind of jokingly poke fun at other people, because I'm saying, hey, look, I can take a joke. And so, I'm sharing this humor with other people as well. The problem with self-deprecating humor is if you use it too much. So some people only use self-deprecating humor. And if you only use that, then people will start to worry over time. They'll start to wonder like, wait, is this person really actually bad at their job? Or do they have like self-esteem issues? Is this a pity party? Like what's going on? So it's one that's best used kind of sparingly. And then finally, you have aggressive humor. And aggressive humor is a negative form of humor where the target is someone else. So this includes satire, it includes sarcasm. It's a lot of the like more biting or edgy type of material that you hear in a stand-up comedy club. And this can be a really effective form of humor as a form of catharsis. So if you're in a high stress situation, so for example, when we work with like people who are like emergency first responders, where we work with nurses or doctors, or when we're working with the FBI, et cetera, groups that see a lot of really intense things, sometimes use aggressive humor as a way to relieve stress. And that can be good if everyone's kind of on board with that style of humor. Where you run into problems is, one, if an outside person sees you using that kind of dark or gallows humor, then they might think of you as insensitive. Or if you're using that type of humor with people that don't have a strong relationship with you, instead of it coming across as like, say, playful, it may come across as an insult or as you making fun of them, poking fun at them. And so aggressive humor is one of the hardest forms of humor to effectively use in the workplace. And so because we primarily focus on teaching people how to use humor to be more effective in their work, we focus on the affiliative and self-enhancing humor of what we train. And then we use some self-deprecating humor for ourselves. And then we tend to shy away from the aggressive humor.
Wow, that's amazing. I have been taking notes. Those are so amazing. I didn't know that actually there are so many types of humors, so many types of humor. Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow, that's awesome. For an ordinary person like me, I don't think I'm humorous enough, but I want to become more humorous. Is there any like small steps that I can take, like actual daily practice?
Yeah, there's a few things. The first thing that I would say is that I have never met a single person who doesn't have a sense of humor. Right? Doesn't mean they necessarily have the skill of humor, but they absolutely have a sense of humor. And as we talked about before, humor is a skill. So we believe the question isn't, are you funny? But what kind of funny are you? And so the research that we've focused on the last few years, my brother, who is a researcher and a professor at a university in the US, we've really looked at what are the different ways people tend to express their humor. And so we've found 7 different ways. What you can kind of think of either as like your humor DNA or your humor personas, and there's 7 different ones. And oftentimes when we think of someone that's funny, we think of someone who is what we call the entertainer. This is someone who is funny in front of other people. They're able to kind of like go with the flow. They're just very conversationally funny. They can tell a story about standing in line at the grocery store, and yet it's still somehow funny and entertaining, etc. They're the person like my brother. And so a lot of people think that if you're not that, then you're just not funny, or that you're not very humorous. But that's just 1 out of 7. The others include the enthusiast. So the enthusiast is someone who maybe isn't outwardly funny themselves, but they find a lot of joy in a lot of different things, that they're quick and easy to laugh, that there's someone who seeks out when they're having a stressful day, they go and they look at videos online to make them laugh so that they relieve some of that stress. Or that when a friend makes a joke, they go out of their way to make sure that they laugh at that person's joke or smile, or at least let them know that they really liked it. So they basically appreciate the joys of everyday life. And so anyone with a sense of humor can kind of be more of an enthusiast, right? So you can find ways like, okay, how can I seek out more humor in my life? How can I find ways to laugh a little bit more? How can I intentionally, every day after work, make sure that I'm going to listen to a comedy podcast or watch a quick video online to laugh, relieve a little bit of stress, and then be more present for my family when I get home, right? So that's one example of a quick thing that you could do. So that's the enthusiast. Then you have the curator. The curator is someone who, when they find something that makes them laugh, they share it with other people that they think would like that thing, right? So this is if you have a friend that's constantly sending you memes or videos online. That's actually a way to connect with people. It's not just like, hey, here's a funny thing, but they're saying if they send it to you, that means that they were thinking of you. And research has shown that when 2 people laugh at the same thing, they actually become a little bit closer together, because it's saying, hey, you thought that thing was funny. I thought that thing was funny. We must be alike in some way. And so if you're a curator, if you already naturally do that, one way you can build your skill of humor a little bit more or practice or be more of a humorist is you can say, okay, when I see something funny, I'm going to try to think of 1, 2, or 3 people to share that with. Or if you know people like to laugh, you could say, okay, if my spouse is already stressed out, well, maybe can I find a funny video or a funny meme or a funny cartoon to send them so that they smile a little bit through the day and I just become a bright spot a little bit for them, right? You don't have to be funny. You're not the one that created that funny thing, but you found something someone else created and shared it with other people. So that's another easy way to get started.
Mm-hmm.
The next persona is one that we call the inventor. The inventor is one of the harder ones to get started for a lot of people. This is someone who understands kind of like the craft of humor. They understand things like a setup and punchline or a comic triple or some of the science part of humor. They like to sit down and write things out. And maybe they're not really good at saying them out loud, but they might be really funny in text message or via email, etc. And so there's some strategies, some exercises that inventors can use to work to get a little bit better. We have the entertainer, like we talked about. We also have what we call an engineer. So I consider myself a humor engineer as one of the personas. And this is someone who uses humor to solve problems. And so it's someone that uses the map a lot to think of like, okay, I've got this project that I've got to work on. I don't want to do it. I've got to update, I got to go through and reconcile all my expenses and my finances or whatever. It's a task that I don't want to do. What can I do to make that more fun? Oh, I know, I'm going to listen to some music while I do it, right? It's that intentional, like, okay, how do I use humor to solve problems? Then we have the advocate. So the 6th persona is the advocate. This is someone who creates the space for other people to use humor. So maybe you're not the super funny person yourself, but you're the one that organizes your friend group to get together. Or maybe you're not the funnest friend there, but you're the one that decided like, hey, let's all go to karaoke night, or let's all go bowling, or let's all do this thing, and you coordinated the activities, etc., for it to happen. That's still incredibly valuable to do. That's an advocate kind of playing that role, helping set other people up for success. And then finally, you have the skeptic. And so if people are listening and they're like, this all sounds stupid, or I still don't agree with you, I don't think I'm funny or whatever, you might be a little bit of the skeptic. And the skeptic is actually a really valuable persona because they are someone who looks at, is humor appropriate? Is it making sure that, are we using humor that's going to help to build relationship? Are we going to use humor to fit in the right area? Is it a positive thing, right? Is it building people up or not, right? And so what I would say is one place to start is think about which of those 7 resonate with you. And we have a free assessment on our website people can go to, and they can take, answer 16 questions, and it'll tell you what your primary persona is. And then you can start with that. You can say, okay, like if I'm naturally more of a curator, what are some small ways that I can start to curate more in my life? And then the intent is that you can learn all 7, right? You can grow to like, maybe you start as a curator, but then over time you get a little bit better as an entertainer and all that kind of stuff. That's part of building the skill. So my encouragement would be start with the one that comes most naturally to you. And then over time, start to build these other ones. As you get more confidence, as you get more practice, they all kind of interconnect in some way. Because if you're a curator and you're constantly finding stuff that other people like, you could start to look at that stuff and be like, okay, why was this thing funny? Could I do, like, if this was a really funny video between 2 people, could I learn some of what they're doing and become that entertainer myself, etc. Right? Does that make sense as a place to potentially start?
Wow, that's more than what I asked for. Just so good, so good. It's a treasure box I just opened. I loved it, and I can identify myself to enthusiasts for sure. I can find the joy in everything, and all the other ones. Wow, there are so many different ways to discover joy, discover humor in life, and different ways. That's amazing. And I know time goes so fast, but there's one thing we haven't talked about it, and also your TEDx talk. I would love you to share a little bit about your experience on that, and because your story is still stuck in my head about your grandma. I remember, right?
So I was very fortunate to do a TEDx talk on the skill of humor. I recently learned it's one of the top 50 most viewed TEDx talks on the TEDx YouTube channel. It's a little over more than 14 million views. And it starts with the story about my grandmother, and the shortened version of it essentially is, my grandmother was texting with me, and she was, still new to text messaging at the time. And eventually, at one point, I was in Switzerland speaking at an event. I came back and I had texted my grandmother about speaking there, and her response was, "Dear Andrew," because she always wrote the "Dear Andrew" part in her text messages because she, acted like it was a letter. She's like, "Switzerland, WTF?" And I was like, what? Like, I
What?
was so shocked that my grandmother would say WTF. So I called her up and I was like, "Grandma, what do you think WTF means?" And she was like, "Oh, well, someone at my bridge club told me it means wow, that's fun." And I did not have the heart to tell her that it meant something else to a lot of other people. And so I start the TEDx talk with that story, but to make the point that I do believe the world would be a better place. I think your life would probably be a little bit more fun and exciting and more humorous if in those moments you can try to think, wow, that's fun. As you can look at difficult situations or a test that you have to do, or any moment that you normally say one version of the WTF, you can think about, what if I said this other one of wow, that's fun, and how do I make it a little bit more enjoyable? But that talk, it's an 18-minute version of kind of distilling down the message of some of what we've talked about here. The intent of it is to hopefully encourage, one, give people permission about the value of humor, two, hopefully convince them that it is in fact a skill that you can learn, and three, give them the inspiration or the drive to go out and learn at least a little bit more. And based on the response, based on the comments, based on the opportunities, it's kind of unlocked since then. I think it's a message that resonates with a lot of people.
Yeah, I loved it. I think I watched it multiple times. Added to your 40 million views.
Yeah.
Wow, that's amazing. I do think that video can inspire a lot more people to think deeper. You can nurture this skill that is so wonderful, so powerful. So I know it's feels very short. I feel like we can talk a lot more. I have more questions, but it's towards to the end of our session, our interview. Do you have any other parting words and wisdom you would like to share with our audience?
Yeah, I would say that one of the things we were just talking about, the TEDx talk, that I find interesting about humor is that it's been viewed more than 14 million times. There's over 200,000 likes on the talk, but there's also a bunch of dislikes on the talk. And some of the comments on the talk are very positive. They say things like, "Oh, wow, this guy was very funny while explaining how to be funny." And one person was like, "I think this guy is genius," etc. Those all feel very, very nice. I like those. But there are also comments that aren't so nice. Like one person was like, "This dude's forehead is so big, it has its own sense of humor," which I just think is kind of funny. Like I do have a pretty big, forehead. And then some people were on the comments were just like, "This guy isn't funny. Like this guy is trying too hard." And it's interesting because if you look at the comments, for every like 5 positive comments, there's a negative one. And they seem to like not match. One, like some people will be like, "This guy is funny," and then someone will say, "This guy isn't funny." Another person says like brilliant, witty, and entertaining. Another person is like, "Go back to engineering, please." Right? Like there's this whole dichotomy.
Yeah.
And I know as a kind of creator, you're not really supposed to read YouTube comments or comments online, right? Because they don't tend to be super positive. And so those comments used to bother me for a little bit. But the longer I kind of looked at them, the longer I did this work, I realized that like every ounce of energy that I give to the people who don't like what I do is energy that I'm not using to help the people that do resonate with my message. And how that relates to you and to other people, I think, is if you let the fear of someone else thinking that you're not, quote unquote, that you're not funny, or the fear of what other people are going to think because you try something new, if you let that fear prevent you from even trying, then one, you're guaranteeing you're not making any choices or changes because you're not even trying. And two, you're robbing yourself of more joy. And so I just encourage people to say, like, if this is something that you really want to do, there are going to be family members who are going to, like, if you tell them like, hey, I'm going to, sign up for an improv class, or I want to do a little bit more humor or whatever, there might be family members that say, why would you do that? You're not funny, or that's not going to work, or that's not professional, or whatever. Like, don't worry about them, right? It's your life that you live. And if you want more joy and positivity in the world, I would say, in your own world, I'd say absolutely go out and take it. And the people who like matter will start to resonate with that. It might take a little bit of time, but they'll resonate. And at least from personal experience, I can tell you that you'll be a whole lot happier. And ultimately, the thing that I love about humor is ultimately more successful as well.
Yeah, I love that. This message is just so big. We can apply it to all aspects in life.
Mm-hmm.
I believe many people heard those comments from others that can be very disheartening and discouraging. So this is a great way to respond. It's maybe yes, and change the WTF to different version of WTF.
Yeah, exactly. Love it.
Yeah, thank you so much, Andrew, for your time and your wisdom, and love the practical tips that you shared with me. And when you share your assessment link with me, so I can attach to my podcast for people to do the assessment. I believe many of the people who listened to this podcast or watch this podcast, I believe they will take that first step.
Yep, so, absolutely. That's a great, easy first step. Is you can go to humorthatworks.com. We've got a bunch of resources there for people. One of them is a free assessment, which is right there kind of on the homepage. And even if you decide that you don't want to, if people for whatever reason don't want to go to the website, if they're like, all right, I like the idea, but not your voice or whatever, if for whatever reason they don't want to go there, I would just encourage you to make that choice and say, okay, how can you find a little bit more humor every single day?
Thank you so much, Andrew. Appreciate your generosity and your kindness again, and being the light to me and also to my audience. Thank you so much.
Absolutely. You are very welcome.
And also to our audience, if you like this episode and the other episode, please share the wisdom, share the light with the people you love. Thank you.